I'm gonna hurt Jesse's feelings. Counterbalance.
What?
He likes that card.
Fuck you. That's the most underrated card ever.
man.
We're about to fight, bro. No. Those are fighting moves.
The only reason I think it's overrated is because
No one plays it. What do you mean?
It's overrated because you're so high on it.
Exactly.
I love that card. It's overrated because Alex got fucking countered by Force of Will and he's mad.
All right. So thanks for joining me last minute, guys.
Yeah.
No problem.
Thank you for having us, bro.
So I got Scryfall pulled up in case I'm gonna need that for any reference, but I figure we'll just round robin it, or I don't know. Do you guys want to like I'll go then you go, or do you want me to just list off?
Yeah, I think I have 4 of them lined up here.
Hireling hella overrated.
So this is overrated cEDH card. So to
Can we get the list? Or?
just a little preamble. This doesn't necessarily mean the cards are bad. It just means they're overrated.
Ooh, Cyclonic Rift. Yeah. Yes. Okay, I've got 5.
Yeah.
So to start us off, I'm going to say that some of the most overrated cEDH cards are Cantrips, specifically Brainstorm, Preordain, and Ponder.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So my general thesis with these cards is that those Cantrips are good in 60-card competitive formats where you are playing decks that have 4 copies of cards and where you're looking to find specific cards and play tempo to other decks.
Yeah, or cards that serve like very specific functions and do like roughly the same exact thing.
As opposed to EDH, where you have a 99 card deck or 98 card deck, and you're trying to find specific cards out of the top random 3 cards in your 99 card deck.
They're only good like if you wind up playing a deck that makes like an assload of mana and the tempo loss just like isn't that bad, i.e. like Malcolm Kedis type shit.
Yeah.
And like the filtering is like fine. Or I don't know, like if hitting land drops is like, I don't know, like one of the things that you can do with them is like that they are consistent on still like doing is finding like mana sources, like smoothing out that kind of stuff. But yeah, it just you don't have the same
losses too much compared to tutors, right? Because tutors give you exactly what you want, will increase that consistency. Brainstorm and all those others are like going to be less consistent, but it's like it's still slowing you down by a turn in a lot of cases when you're casting these things. So you need to be a deck that's like putting out mana, not only like lots of mana where you can afford to take that hit, but consistently.
All right, Grim Hireling, baby.
I would say like there are some circumstances where they're fine. Like I think Brainstorm is fine in Yuriko when you're gonna hit specific like big mana stuff to hit your opponents with. But
it's good if you have the mana to take advantage of the. If you don't lose tempo from casting them and you actually gain tempo, then it's good. But most decks lose tempo because.
Well, you don't ever gain tempo with them, but like.
Or like if you can't effectively use them and then still have other things to do, then it's kind of like useless.
Yeah.
So, Jesse, do you want to take the next one? You were telling me in person the other day that Food Chain sucks.
Yeah, that deck sucks balls.
Don't play Food Chain.
I don't even know why it sucks. It just sucks. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No,
You have to
I
play
know
mana
why it sucks.
with it. That's why.
You have to play what?
You have to play mana dorks to make it work in your fast combo deck.
It's not even that. Like you can play like a few mana dorks, but like the real issue with Food Chain is that you're not dodging anything compared to decks that are fast.
You have to play a fucking horrible commander to make the card actually work.
Yeah,
that too. You just play really bad
You have
commanders.
to play a commander that does fucking nothing.
So the only commander that I know is in Food Chain is the Cascade Sliver.
There's Okima, which is the best one.
I think Ukima Kazura is really where you want to be a lot of times.
Corvold can play it. I
Corvold
think
too.
Corvold is the best like standalone deck that plays Food Chain.
I would
Corvold does a bunch of things, you know what I mean? And Food Chain really honestly like isn't the strongest one of them. But like Corvold at least actually fucking does something by itself.
It makes sense too also, right? Because Corvold can actually draw you cards, you know, so if you get stopped with any of those other commanders, you're stuck doing nothing. And you know, I don't know, you compare that to other decks. If there was like a partner that was just an outlet for Food Chain that you could play with Tymna, I think the strategy would be a lot better, if I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah, actually, if there's a green partner that was like
if Thrasios you could dump 4 mana Thrasius and it would ping someone. That would be like where Food Chain would shine, maybe. Wait, but you can't even. No, that wouldn't work because that'd be an activate ability.
If there's like a green creature that when it ETBs, like a green partner that would like, I don't know, you could cast infinite times and kill people with, sure. But that is not the state of the world. Until that day, Food Chain, you probably don't want to play it.
So the main complaints with it are you have to play bad commanders with it, and you have to play mono dorks in your vast mono deck.
Yes, you have to play. Yeah, you have to play like mana dorks in your deck that's supposed to be like a fast combo deck. It gets shut down by like normal hate, and you have to play commanders that are just really bad in general.
You're also trading like a full turn of speed pretty much for the ability to dodge Null Rod compared to faster decks, which is just like it's not worth it as a trade-off.
All right, Alex, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah, I think I can pick on Grim Hireling a little bit. I think this card is really overhyped because people see it as like, oh well, I can play this in Tim the decks, Tim the Donger. You know, this seems fine, but from what I've seen of it, I haven't really been impressed with it against Stax decks. I mean, yes, you can like kill off hate bears, but it is still just like kind of a slow value engine. I played in Corval for what it's worth, and even then I found it was kind of lackluster in the deck that like is all about sacrificing things. Like if you're making treasures in Corval and you're not doing much with it, then the card is probably not premium.
The problem is people try to jam it in their like decks that are trying to turn the corner really fast. And the thing is, it's not a card that's going to do that. If your deck is built
grindy,
to grind and like do that game plan effectively, and you have like other targets that are worth killing, I guess. So it's just not going to eat the first removal spell that the Stax player sees, that the Stax player has. Because that realistically, like if you're in that grindy state and you've played like nothing that's like worth killing, you just have some shitters, and all of a sudden you're like Grim Hireling. Like it's just it's gonna die. But like if you're trying to go into that mid game consistently, it winds up like it's actually very strong. But I think putting it in like decks that are trying to go really fast, you would rather just have like something that just deals with everything all at once, and so you can like turn the corner really fast, get rid of everything, and then just like pivot to whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I think if you were doing something like that, you really would rather want to like pick your thing. You know, are you gonna like try to kill tons of hate bears over like 3 or 4 turns? I mean, in a deck that wants to turn the corner, I would way rather just play Dress Down or Toxic Deluge. I think that's like it synergizes a lot better with the deck's core game plan.
I think the problem with the card is entirely the mana cost, because Professional Facebreaker and Malcolm basically do the same thing, and those cards are great.
Yeah, that is a good point, actually. I think people are like starting to pivot over towards Professional Facebreaker, which I definitely think that's a better option.
I think saying that they do the same effect is not I don't think that's how you want to put it. I think that's when you're trying to do the like removal stuff game plan, you really want it like there and now.
Well, I'm evaluating it entirely on the treasure making part.
Oh,
I think it kind of like falls into this gap a little bit between like something like Professional Facebreaker or Malcolm and, you know, actual like hosers like Toxic Deluge and Dress Down, right? Yeah. Where like you're kind of splitting the difference and not doing either particularly well, because you're more expensive at making the treasures, but then you're also not as effective as killing the Stax pieces.
I was gone for a little bit. What's up?
So, I mean, you have to like pick and choose what you want. I think like either, you know, getting more mana or like I'm gonna hose everything is better than like I'm gonna do a little bit of both and then kind of like sit around.
And when you're on 4 already, it's like I don't know, you have like a fair amount of mana, and it's like it as far as like the mana generation aspect of it, it's like pretty fair.
Maybe a little bit too fair.
It's good if you can take advantage of it in a like long term. But if you're looking for explosiveness and you're playing a deck that's explosive, you're just not. That's not what you're getting with it.
Do you have anything to add, Jesse?
For the
Hireling.
For Grim Hireling?
Hireling? I think it's all right. I mean, it's cool. I like the professional facebreaker a little bit better. I think that just does what it's. Oh, I mean, it has creature removal, but I think professional facebreaker is just better as a card in most decks. It's also red, which is just a better color, I guess, right now. Oh, I guess
Jesse's like, I like red.
Another thing is that Malcolm is a commander and it has its own combos and whatnot. And professional facebreaker also, if you can generate infinite treasures with like Dockside or something, you can win with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is really cool, actually. I didn't even think about that.
All right, so moving on. John, did you have a card?
I didn't really pulled up anything yet. I was gonna say Grim Hireling, but what?
I have some other ones that I have listed. That
I have a whole bunch of them too, so I can.
I have opinions on stuff. If you say something, I can. I mean, I have strong opinions on.
Sure,
If you give me an example, I can.
I'll do the next one. Gitaxian Probe. So obviously, it's great in Krark Sakashima, but aside from that, you're paying 2 life to do nothing.
Yeah.
You're making your deck 1 card smaller.
Yeah, but even there's a lot of, and you would call them off cases, but they're not really off cases. If you're playing in a stacks meta, and there's a rules wall out, just in general,
so
if there's a rules
punished.
wall out, you just
feels so bad.
And you draw get.
What about like even a sphere of resistance?
so
like
bad.
it's just becomes
that's
really unappealing if you see something like that. Also,
anytime there's any sort of stacks, the card just becomes really bad.
And then like this doesn't happen like quite as much, but evaluating opening hands when you have something like that, you're like, oh, is this going to wind up being land? What is it going to wind up being? I'm not sure. How is this going to work? It's like, I don't know. And sometimes you can there are decks that can use the information aspect of it pretty well and sandbag stuff, but that's not always the case.
So my problem with it here is that it seems like the 2 use cases are either you want to combo, and so you're looking at someone's hand to see if they have interaction, in which case, if they have it, I mean, what are you going to do? You just spend a card to do nothing, and you don't get to see the other 2 players' hands either. And then the second case is where you think someone else might combo, and you're trying to look at their hand to see if they have it, to see if you need to leave counters up or something, in which case, again, well, if they have it, they have it. What are you going to do? If they don't have it, then you're not going to leave up interaction. What if they draw it?
Yeah. And I don't know, you also wind up having to in this format without sideboards, having your extra vampiric tutor target that can get to something is very valuable. And the making your deck one card smaller type thing is really not statistically relevant.
Yeah,
you can't play 4 of a card. You know what I mean? It's.
I mean, I think Yu-Gi-Oh actually provide me with a pretty good example of why you don't really want to be playing Gitaxian Probe, right? Because they have Upstart Goblin in that game, which is very similar. I mean, it's just a spell. Your opponent gains 1,000 life and you draw a card, but people have started evaluating that okay, well, if there's any sort of hate pieces, then this becomes drastically worse. And then also you might not be, looking at the way that your deck is constructed, you might not even want to give your opponent the life points, right? Because you might have a combo that does exact damage or something like that, and you're putting them out of range. So, I mean, I think the bottom line is you have to really evaluate what it's doing for your deck, as opposed to going oh, why not? Everyone else is playing it.
So I think you can even evaluate this from the perspective of other formats where there are free cards like Mishra's Bauble, Monomorphose, and Street Wraith. And most decks don't play those cards because, again, you want cards in your deck that are actually useful and are not just free cycling.
That is cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And when you can only see one player's hand, not all the players' hands, it changes. It makes things a little weird.
Probe is much better in 1-on-1, but with Commander, The upside is just you just thin your deck.
All right, Alex,
actually-
you taking the next one?
Yeah. I think I'm gonna pick on Cyclonic Rift. Actually, I think this is the thing because Cyclonic Rift isn't as universally applicable as it used to be because there's been new tech discovered and there's more options now than there used to be. So I mean, in general, what you run into with Cyclonic Rift is like, yes, it cleans up everything for like clogged stacks board states. That sort of thing is pretty good, and you really want that into blind meta. The problem is if you're playing a deck that wants to combo quickly, it usually doesn't work out that well against stacks because they try to combine Rule of Law plus Null Rod, which means you're not going to. That's typically what happens, right? So you're not able to really effectively ritual up to 7 mana, and you're not able to use artifacts like Dockside or something. So you're having to just play 7 lands and cast this card, which is not like a great value proposition.
Unless you can grind really hard and you have like, I don't know, unless you have a deck that can grind really hard.
You're playing Blue Farm.
Those.
That is the use case. You're playing Blue Farm. Yeah. Or like you're playing a dedicated like mid-range deck with like Thrasios or something. I think Rushing River fills the slot like a lot better. And like the card is just clean. I mean, most of the time getting rid of 2 things is functionally the same as getting rid of everything because you're gonna have like 2 things that are major. And casting for 3 mana is a lot easier than 7. You're also able to hold up like interaction with it too if you need to. Like, I don't know, maybe there's like a Null Rod and like Rest in Peace or something like that in play. You need to get rid of both of those. You can actually have like a Spell Pierce to like hold that up as backup. Whereas for Cyclonic Rift, good luck. It's 7 mana. You're not holding up an 8th most of the time.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna hard disagree.
I think being on 2 also matters for Chalice and Sanctum Prelate. That would be the one thing I'd add in also.
I'm gonna have to hard disagree because to me, Cyclonic Rift is just it's an out to anything. It's always just something that you can find later in the game that will provide you with, 1, it's just a huge swing on the board to get rid of everything, but 2, it is an out to any kind of superior board state, multiple stacks pieces, etc.
Then it winds. Yeah, it does, but like the thing is, people have like realized that, and every stacks deck has a game plan versus Cyclonic Rift. Every deck that's trying to set up an impressive board state has to. They have a counter for that, even if they don't have like counter spells specifically. They have their share of hate pieces that will make them not lose to the card. I think the card is still very good. I think a lot of decks, a lot of the time you want to play the card, but I think
I just think it's more like it's more at home in mid range, right? I don't think like we can just drag and drop in every deck because I've had I've like tried playing this in like faster decks. I've just found the like the overloaded have to be uncastable pretty much. It just ended up being kind of like Winds of Rebuke.
As a Stax player, I have had the most problems with Dress Down, Rushing River, Chain of Vapor. Those are the ones that usually get through. Cyclonic Rift is very rarely. It just takes
too long.
It takes too long, and by that time, I've probably put a Prelate on 2, which I'm going to put it on 2 99% of games, unless I know it's in your hand and I can counter that.
I still the problem is like I don't know. It winds up being like, I mean, obviously it's still like fine on 2, but it's not like, I don't know. I think you don't have to play it in decks that are trying to go faster because you're just not gonna hit that. A lot of times, if you're in one of those bogged down board states, you're not gonna hit that 7 mana and be able to like overload it into those weird states.
I mean, everything like said it here though. I mean, if I was like playing a Thrasios or like a Kenrith mid-range deck, like I would have 0 complaints with Cyclonic Rift. It's mostly that like in faster decks, like decks that want to play like 28 lands and that sort of thing, it just becomes like a lot more of a difficult proposition.
Yeah, if you're a fast deck that doesn't have a good grind game plan, it is pretty medium. It's pretty medium. cards here.
Okay, I'll do the next one. Imperial Seal. So I think the issue here is that a big part of what makes the tutors so good is them being instant speed and you being able to cast them at the end of the turn of the player who's directly behind you or directly in front of you. Whereas Imperial Seal, unless you can draw the card you're getting with it immediately with something like Yuriko or Timna, casting it and then having a whole turn cycle go around the board where things can radically change, where by the time it gets back to you, you may not even want the card that you tutored for anymore.
Yeah, I would agree
That's
that
definitely a downside. Yeah.
it does fall off, like, especially on later turns for that exact reason, right? I mean, like, early turns you can kind of predict what's going to happen more, and then, you know, later turns in games tend to, like, get kind of crazy with, like, people playing bombs or, like, random disruption or things like that. But I think
I
the
almost
card
want
is...
to, like, add to that in general with a
Yeah.
statement. I think this is going to sound weird, but I think that they're not, like, I guess I guess we're doing, like, most overrated things, so I'll take this back. I won't say this, but I was basically going to say, I think jamming your deck with every tutor you can is actually, like, it's a little overrated. Because, like, I've seen so many fucking, like, I don't know, you just cannot, like, hands that have, like, double or triple fucking tutor in them are unplayable, like, a large percentage of the time, just because of, like, the speed of the format and, like, how much tempo you lose by going, okay, top deck tutor, demonic tutor. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like...
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I definitely agree with that.
I've caught myself in a number of games where I see a hand with, like, double tutor and, like, only like double tutor and one piece of acceleration, and I'm just like, I don't know that I want this. It's weird. It's really weird. But I don't think this is productive for what we're talking about here. Just something I've kind of noticed.
I feel like Imperial Seal is still pretty good just because of, like, how efficiently costed it is. But, like, it mostly compares unfavorably to the other tutors because, again, those are, like, at instant speed. But I definitely think I definitely think you want your deck probably over something like Grim Tutor, right? Anything that's like Grim Tutor or, you know, worse than that, just because of the cost efficiency.
Yeah.
Ooh.
All right. You have another one, Alex?
Yeah. I'll point out Mnemonic Betrayal, actually, because
that's a good one.
I just like kind of wrote about this for
Are we grouping Mnemonic and Yogg-Will together?
I don't think so, actually. I think Mnemonic Betrayal is a little bit different with some of my complaints about it. Because
we're lumping Underworld Breach with that, right? That card's like, so bad, so overrated.
Like, here's the thing with Mnemonic Betrayal. I've tried, like, on and off making it work in various ways since about 2018, and it never quite seems to come together in the way you think. I mean, you look at it as, like, okay, this, at best, like, this is a triple Yawgmoth's Will, and you can, like, play out other people's win conditions. In practice, what ends up happening a lot of the time is you have to wait until later on in the game, and then the graveyards maybe have, like, a Lotus Petal and, like, some tutors, and you try to cobble together a play from that. But it's very rare that you're able to, you know, snag, like, an Underworld Breach or, like, an Oracle or something like that. It tends to be, like, tutors, and you have to get your own win conditions for that sort of thing.
It's a very specific meta.
Yeah, Yawgmoth's Will is different because you can kind of set that up, like, in your own deck that wants to play Yawgmoth's Will. You know, you're probably playing rituals and things like that, so you're able to do the Yawgmoth's Will and then immediately be able to play multiple rituals, maybe like a Lotus Petal or something like that, and then try to turn the corner immediately. And that just doesn't really happen with opponents' graveyards. You tend to see, like, a Lotus Petal pretty much, if you're lucky, and, like, maybe a tutor or so. I think it's still, like, pretty playable probably in metas that are, like, that have a lot of fast combo, because the deck lists are going to be very similar, right? If you have, like, 4 Turbonaws decks at the table, then yeah, I think it's likely that somebody's like ritual, and then somebody, you know, counters the payoff, and then you're able to, use Mnemonic Betrayal and try to do something like that yourself. But I think it's kind of narrow. The use case for it just isn't that appealing, I think.
Basically, you can sculpt your own graveyard, but you can't sculpt your opponent's.
Yeah. And also in terms of like payoffs, I guess this is also like another important point, but for fast combo decks, you tend to want to have payoffs that are independently reliable. You know, you want to be able to keep a hand that's like, okay, I'm going to play out like my fast mana here and then like play a wheel or something like that. Or like, here's my Sylvan Library, here's my Rhystic Study. I want to go back up in cards and try to make plays from that point on. Oh. And Mnemonic Betrayal is like, that's not a card that you really do with. It's not really like, it's not going to be very functional until multiple turns into the game, and that's just like, you don't want to see in your opening hand, and that's like kind of a damning case for a card, if I'm going to be honest, with how good like Live Acceleration is in the format.
I have one now, actually.
Go ahead.
An offer you can't refuse.
Oh, yeah, I think we're kind of on similar wavelength with this card.
It's a cool card, but it is overrated.
It's a cool card, but a lot of people have kind of put this card in the vein of it's an auto include now. It's an auto include in your blue counter suite package, and I really can't agree with that. There's a reason why this card is going to see 0 play in any 60 card format, and not to like.
I can't agree with you there, but keep going.
Well, okay, but like as a disruptive card, it's going to see almost like if you're playing this card just to counter your opponent's spells in 60 card, like that, it's just that's not. Well, like, am I wrong?
That's correct.
Okay, that makes sense.
So the reason why it's being played in like a few decks in 60 card formats, like this is like nowhere near a staple, but the reason for playing this over something like a Spell Pierce would be that you're playing free stuff yourself, and you want to have the option of, you know, playing out something that's free and then countering it and getting treasures yourself and trying to use that. So in something like Twiddlestorm, for instance, you can counter like your own spells to like set up for a combo turn, something like that.
The best use for it is actually an ad nauseum.
Yeah.
You can actually win the game with it in ad naus.
Yeah. Twiddlestorm's trying to do a similar thing. I know in Neobrand it's like eaten up the Manamorphose slot and consolidated it, just because you can counter your own Mox Amber or Nourishing Shoal or what have you, and then you're able to filter your mana into the correct colors to win.
And to tie this back into like cEDH now, that like you're just giving your opponents like the ability to cast more spells, and you're essentially like giving them resources and tempo by doing such. And like when it winds up being really good is when your opponents obviously like don't have stuff to do with the treasures and the mana. But we're playing in a format as well that's like often you don't have the luxury of countering spells that are going to like get people slightly ahead, or like card advantage engines, I suppose, just because they get set up early, and it's not quite within like what you're going to be doing all the time. And here, what winds up happening is you counter a spell, and you just, if your opponents aren't, if they're not on their like last resources, they're gonna like find something to do with that mana. And while it's like it will, you know, counter a large variety of things, if you are not planning on getting your opponents to a low resource state, it's not the best. Because they're gonna find something to do with that. It's mana, right?
Maybe you can do like anything to like a practical example. You know,
sure.
I mean, so here's the thing with an offer, right? Let's compare this with Spell Pierce, something like that. Okay, you would be wanting to use this on early turns to kind of disrupt opponents, right? Or use it as protection yourself. Okay, so if you're playing a fast combo deck and use it as protection for your own thing on your turn, you may be giving an opponent who's playing a slower deck the mana they need to use other counter magic in their own hand. So that can come back to bite you in the butt, right? Because you think you have this protection, but in reality, you're just unlocking the other spells for your opponents when they're most crimped on mana. That's the issue. And here, alternatively, if you're using this as interaction, if you're playing a deck in early turns, let's say there's like a Rogue Silas deck or something, and they have a wheel on the stack, and you counter it, they might have another payoff in hand, and you might be accelerating them with like giving them more mana for that. Yeah. That's like fairly common for these decks, right? If you're not mulliganing down to like 5 and just like having mana plus 1 payoff, if you're like above that, you're often in a position where you're like, okay, I have 2 payoffs in hand, or like I have payoff plus protection. So it just like, it doesn't trade favorably in those situations. I mean, obviously you're not going to get into these all the time, but these are fairly common situations. So I would be kind of concerned about the card. The slower your deck is, I think the more profitably you can play it, because it tends to be a lot better in the late game compared to something like Spell Pierce, right?
Yeah. Right. That's the upside for it.
And again, this is also, at the end of the day, this is also like a 1 mana counter spell that hits everything but creatures. So there's a floor on like how bad it can be, I guess, in a deck, right? Like it's still the baseline is very good, but watch out for those things that you might think are corner cases. They might crop up more often than you think.
So I bought I bought a single copy of it just to put in an EDH deck, and then I was looking through the deck to figure out, okay, what do I cut for it? And I realized I wanted every other counter spell in the deck over it.
It's an interesting card. I think like the main point I feel about it is that like it just is really not a great protection spell. You do not want to be using this card to like protect your own things. Just opening your opponents up to cast whatever other spells they have is very dangerous.
Well, we were mentioning this the other day. I think we also both came to the conclusion that if you're not playing the blasts like Red Elemental Blast and Pyroblast, those might be more favorable inclusions right now with how things have changed with the meta.
Yeah, obviously our meta is very blue intensive. So it's like Red Elemental Blast and Pyroblast wind up being like, okay, I can not only stop like people's win cons by killing their Malcolm or hitting their Niv Mizzet or Consecrated Sphinx or something, but I can also protect my own win cons and like counter Rhystic Study and whatnot on the stack. But again, like these, I feel like the difference between this card and those cards is like everyone acknowledges that Rev and Pyro are like good in specific metas, and I don't know, just the vein that this is an auto include in your counter suite package now, like regardless of what meta you're playing in, I can't really get behind that. I think there's a lot of decks where this card is very good in, but I can't find myself wanting to put this in like, I don't know, more faster proactive decks.
All right, so speaking of counter spells, and this is going to be, I think, the best card amongst the batch that I have on my list, Mental Misstep. So I understand why people play it. It counters tutors, it counters demonic consultation. There's, a bunch of 1 mana things that you want to counter. But it is so restrictive in what you can hit with it. And I think of the counter spells that I generally play, which are like Mana Drain, Delay, Red Blast. Those cards are pretty much always on. You always have a target for them. Whereas Mental Misstep is so often a dead card in your hand and unable to do anything with it.
So if I can, chime in, I guess a little bit, because I'm, kind of known for like playing decks that are like really fast and aggressive. The play patterns for Mental Misstep are kind of interesting because you either play it very early or you hold on to it until the very last second of the game, right? You're either trying to use it on turn 1 or, maybe even your own turn 0, right? And the whole goal is, on turn 1, you try to get a power play. Don't use it on like the first mana dork you see, right? But you might want to use it on like an Imperial Seal, like a Mana Vault, especially, maybe a Soul Ring, and especially like a Mystic Remora, because on these early turns, it can be really crucial if you can make the right call for like, especially something like a Soul Ring or a Mana Vault. If you can hit one of those, you might disrupt their hand for the rest of the game and cut their legs out from underneath them in terms of mana production. Outside of that, it tends to be fairly narrow until the late game, where you try to win the game and start a counterspell war over it. And that's the point where Mental Misstep comes in to, maybe save you from like a miscast or an offer you can't refuse or a red elemental blast or something like that. But it, again, it's like not ideal. It's not ideal in the mid game. I guess that's what I mean. It's just like kind of polarized for when you want to use it.
I think the thing about Mental Misstep is it's an incredibly like powerful card if you plan on getting into like stacked. If you have instants or sorceries that you want to resolve to win the game, having Misstep as a free counter for all of the 1 mana interaction pieces that your opponents are going to play is like super good. When that is not the case, I can very much see and like I can kind of feel what you're talking about, Ami. How if you aren't trying to like resolve an ad nauseum to win the game, or like some powerful card that is going to get hit by Swan Song, Spell Pierce, Miscast, the whole crew of 1 mana counters, right? If you're not playing cards that are going to do that, it is not super strong. It winds up like, I don't know, your opponents don't actually have very many 1 CMC things that you want to like reactively counter to stop them. It's a good card for winning the stack war. And when that's like something you feel like you need to do, it's like very good. Otherwise, I think it's pretty medium. But I still think it's a very, very strong card. But I see where you were coming from, and I can acknowledge that this card is overrated.
Yeah, for me, I mostly approach building decks from a value perspective, even if they have combos in them. So Mental Misstep is just always an effect that I never really care about having.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, it's also important to kind of think about like baseline in general for a 4-player format. 1v1s are not really like ideal because two players are going down in cards while the other 2 are like, oh hey, thanks.
Yeah.
So that's like kind of the baseline you have to evaluate things from. So you only play the ones that you can't get away with cutting. You have to play like some amount of interaction. But yeah, I can definitely see why if the interaction is like too narrow, then you're gonna want to pass up on it.
It's just really not a great reactive counter spell. In fact, it's one of the worst at actually stopping your opponents from doing things.
Yeah, it's kind of like 1-for-1ing the other person, but then you're letting other people get ahead by just countering some like small thing. But it does stop like pretty big turn 1 plays. It stops a lot of tutors when someone's are like going for the win. And it's really good in those control decks that like want to use it, but I could, also it's also good in really fast decks too when you want to like counter that.
Yes, and like if you're in like, I don't know, I feel like it's proportionally good as well to like the amount of blue you see.
100%, yeah.
Like if you don't see a lot of blue, Mental Misstep goes down. Like I think you really. I like when I find myself using the card the most and find it like the most relevant is really just countering those 1 mana counter spells. You're not hitting payoffs with this. You're not stopping your opponents from winning with a Mental Misstep ever. So if you're gonna like dedicate a slot in your deck and you want it to be doing that job, most of the time Mental Misstep is not going to do that job. People don't. As much as this is like the Oracle Consult format, and you might think that that's like the only thing that goes on, it's really not. 2-card combos are not like they're they're not the premium right now.
2-card combos are good. 1-card combos are better.
Yes, and the state of things right now is there's a lot of like 1-card, either I win the game or I'm going to pull so far ahead of the game that nobody can get back. And if you're looking to disrupt opponents, Misstep is not doing that job, other than like maybe hitting the turn 1 acceleration piece.
All right, so continuing on the counterspell train, Miscast is my next card. And I would consider this card considerably worse than Mental Misstep. It's kind of similar to Flusterstorm in terms of how much mana your opponent has to pay for it in general, but Flusterstorm is way better in that it's harder to counter Flusterstorm.
Oh, Flusterstorm is so stupid.
Whereas Miscast, a lot of the time, is a counterspell that is incredibly narrow as to what you can hit with it, and you can just pay for it a lot of times.
Yeah, Flusterstorm is like the 1-mana Dovin's Veto, that also beats Deflecting Swat. But yeah, Miscast is another card that I think is almost like seen in the auto include spot now, and I think that's not quite right.
I think people have actually mellowed on it a little bit since it got printed. I remember originally when it came out, people looked at this card and they saw, oh, well, this is just a better Spell Pierce. I think people have kind of come back and realized, like, well, okay, hold on. We value the ability to counter Rule of Law and Rhystic Study and Null Rod, right? Like,
yeah,
they're very valuable cards that aren't instants and sorceries, but also are creatures.
Yeah, or the freaking Winota players mana crypt on turn 1.
I still think that Miscast definitely has a place. I don't find myself agreeing necessarily with paying for it. I think that doesn't happen very often. I think Spell Pierce at 2 mana, you're going to see that a lot more, but paying 3 is not really ideal. How often do people leave 3 open?
I think
that's just my perspective.
I think people have this kind of they have like an idea of the interaction pieces that work and are good, and have like and the thing is like what interaction you're playing should be 100% dependent on what you were seeing and what you were playing against, and like there are very few interaction pieces that I think are actually like cards that you I think there are very few interaction pieces that you need to be playing, because we have a couple that are very strong, and everything else, let's face it, is kind of medium. For a format that is around the same power level as Legacy, the amount of these interaction pieces that we have to play that are really subpar is we have to play a lot of them. And so what we wind up doing is we wind up finding like, okay, well, what am I playing against most of the time? And is this good against what I'm playing against most of the time? And that's kind of how we build our interaction suite. And Miscast is another one of those cards that winds up like falling in that area where it's like, there's a lot of like, Turbonaz is a very popular thing. A lot of people are playing it. It has a lot of success, but it's not the only thing. And there are plenty of decks that, there are metas where Miscast is not going to have like great targets.
Yeah, I think there's metas where you want to change your ratios and shave on more stuff that works on the stack for interaction, like these 1-mana spells, and just go for more removal because you're playing against a lot more decks that care about the board state with stacks pieces, right? All of this has to be contextual. We can say like, we can sit here and argue like, okay, well, you have to play Force of Will if you can, right? But you look at stuff like Force Negation, Misdirection, and well, why aren't those being played as much? And because the answer is because pitching a blue card can be hard for decks. not every deck has the luxury of being able to pitch a blue card for a free piece of interaction. So
well, and they're also just like less universal.
you have to evaluate things in that sort of context.
Alex, did you have another one?
Yeah, so this is the last of them that I prepared myself going into here. But Boseiju, who shelters all, not the new one. Boseiju, who endures, is excellent, I think. But Boseiju, who shelters all, hasn't aged very well, in my opinion. It really feels like a card that was printed in 2002 when you look at the restrictions, right? If this was printed today, it would not come in tapped, cost you 2 life every time you use it, and make a colorless mana. Like, all of that just seems like a lot of hoops to jump through. And yeah, the effect is good, but you really do want it on something like Peer into the Abyss or Ad Nauseam. And outside of that, like some decks just might be too high on color count to make use of it. I mean, to make use of it outside of that context. Here's a practical example for Ecrom. I was testing this out as a way to try to bust through like mid-range metas. Just be able to crop rotation at an end step, get a Boseiju, then untap with it and try to win. In practice, though, it rarely worked out because all the games where you draw the Boseiju, it does not do very much. I'm telling you that right now. Making colorless mana, and that can only be used on instants and sorceries. And a 4-color deck is just not ideal. And yeah, people are also very scared of it, so you're gonna get targeted. It's just actively against your color fixing, and it's slow and kind of clunky. So in my opinion, I'd rather just play something like a Red Elemental Blast or another 1-mana piece of interaction instead of it. I don't think you can even count it as a land, really.
It's not a super good card anymore, and you have to dedicate 2 slots to it. You need Crop Rot to actually make it useful. You have to be playing green, and then the decks that are playing green that are also trying to like basically add Nas, because it's kind of what it's for. So like have an uncounterable Nas. Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty slow for what you're wanting to do, and I think you're all right. If it was printed today, if it was in Modern Horizons 2, it'd probably come in untapped.
No, it would probably still enter tap, but it would have for color and it wouldn't ping you.
Yeah, I think that's what you would have if this was printed in, probably 2020, right? Under Fire Design principles.
You would just tap it and you would win the game.
Sounds accurate.
All right, continuing on with bad lands, and I'm going to group both of these together: Tarnished Citadel and Forbidden Orchard. So
this is interesting.
So the reason that I don't like them is I think they're both good cards because they are rainbow lands that are providing you whatever you need. My issue is, so their drawbacks are really bad, and the bigger issue is, why do you even need to run them in the first place? So between being able to run 10 fetch lands with duels and shocks and triumphs, I guess, if you need them, plus Battle Bond commander lands that come in untapped, plus a suite of other rainbow lands, which off the top of my head are Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, Mana Confluence, City of Brass. Why do you need to run these? Like, it feels like your mana base should already be good enough, and bolting yourself every turn or giving your opponents tokens that they can use to attack with Tymna or sacrifice to Culling the Weak is really bad.
So anytime you have a Forbidden Orchard and you tap it and you're playing against a Winota player, please give the spirit tokens to them. It really hurts their deck. It's not sponsored by Winota at all.
Tymna, Yuriko,
Yeah.
I will 100% agree with Tarnished Citadel being kind of an issue. Like the 3 damage is just so much.
It's really relevant.
I think you would want to play, to be honest, in certain decks, I think you'd want to play like Gemstone Mine instead. But I want to push back a little bit on Forbidden Orchard because I've been experimenting with this card a little bit more recently. I think if color fixing is relevant for your deck, if you're in 4-color or 5-color, then it could be an attractive option. Because if you're not playing Tymna yourself, I think that's a big issue, right? If you're playing Tymna, then you're giving tokens to people and you're actively hurting your own Tymna. It just makes it so much harder to get in. If you're not playing Tymna, this can be kind of fine to clog up the board state. And if you're playing cards like Culling Ritual, it can be good. It's not ideal giving your opponents creatures. I'm like never going to argue that. But I think there are circumstances where you can kind of mitigate that downside and just try to reap the upside of it being a 5-color land as much as possible.
Okay.
Yeah, and one more thing. If you're playing like a deck with artifacts in it, like a fair amount, like 15 or whatever,
Mystery.
just play Spire, or even like
Glimmer
you can
Void.
even play the
Glimmer
Void.
Yeah.
Like I don't think that card's great either, but most of the time in these decks right now, the ones that are like trying to shit out a bunch of artifact mana on turn 1 and then make strong plays, you're mulliganing for for a Crypto Soul Ring, a something. You're gonna have your thing, and
otherwise you wouldn't want to keep the hand in the first place.
You know what though? I found a deck where I wanted to play my Tarnished Citadel in it. Freaking Tyam, because that deck, you just like, you want to play so many utility lands because they enable like your combos and stuff, but like you're like, damn, I really just need another Wooburg land. And then once I get Tyam out and I've played the Tyam, colorless is all I need, because you get out the Tyam, you have your colors the first couple turns, and then you're like, all right, now I'm just gonna activate Tyam and play with Tyam activations.
At that point, couldn't you just play like Aether Hub or something?
Or just
I forget what that card does.
Oh yeah, you're using energy counters for color.
It's just a rainbow that's a one-off rainbow, and then it's colorless for the rest of the game.
Oh, I think you want it. You want to be able to tap it like 2 or 3 times, because you want to be able to like, okay, I can like castle a turn 1 mana dork and then be able to like play something else. Yeah, it's the 3 damage adds up really fast for most decks, and like we're playing a format where like 4/4 flyers with haste are coming out, and freaking we have Pacos and Ishai, and stuff is gonna hit you. And if you're ever the problem and you've been tapping Tarnished Citadel for 4 turns in a row, and all of a sudden everyone's like, hey, this guy's the problem, everybody get him, he's at 20 life, you're gonna die in like a couple turns.
Something figured out is a lot of these cards that incidentally damage you, like Monocrypt and Ancient Tomb or Sylvan Library or any of these other cards, it's not so much that the damage from any one of them is a problem, but it's when you start combining them all together that you start running out of life.
Yeah, I 100% agree. If you're like drawing cards off your Timna as well, and yeah, there's a lot of incidental, I'm gonna poke myself because we're playing with 40 life, and
what I found,
who cares, right?
What I found when I was playing 4-color Rashmi at the time actually was that Sylvan Library was the worst draw engine in the deck, because you wanted to make the game drag out for a lot of turns, but the damage from the Sylvan Library would add up quite a bit over time, and you didn't have a way to effectively recuperate that life. So you were just trading 4 mana or 4 life for a card, and that was it. It was never coming back.
All right, you guys have any more cards? Because I got a bunch more on my list.
I'd stretch out.
I think like as far as like very overrated cards, I have like a few where I think they're like, this card's probably seeing too much play, but I don't think I have any more. I mean, I obviously haven't given much, but listening to what everyone's saying, but like listening to what we've like collectively come up with, I don't have a lot of like, this card is like solidly overrated.
This card is trash and should never be played.
Yeah.
Wait, why don't people play Fatal Push?
Jesse.
Probably doesn't, like, you're not always guaranteed to be able to revolt it, and I think a lot of commanders are 3 mana.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. Yeah, you definitely would want to have the revolt active.
That was like kind of a joke.
There are,
like,
I know it was.
It is actually interesting though to think about situations where you'd probably want that, right? a lot of times where there's like decks that rely on their commander really heavily, a lot of these decks have like 5-mana commanders, stuff like Elsha or like Gitrog or what have you. Kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah.
So, speaking of a card that I have no idea why anyone plays it, Noxious Revival.
Oh.
And whereas a bunch of the other cards on the list, I was like, oh, this card seems overrated, but I at least understand why people use it. I have no idea why people play Noxious Revival.
Yeah, I think there's like 2 explanations for it, and so I think the bad explanation is because people played it for a long time and they think like, yeah, free card is fine. Like kind of the Gitaxian Probe thing. My reason why I play it personally in decks, especially like fast combo decks, is because it can help you get back another piece of another payoff. Right, a lot of times what can happen is you'll try to go for it with a big payoff card. It'll get countered, or something will happen, and it'll end up in the graveyard. And then you're like, well, crap, I didn't have the protection spell for it. But then you can Noxious Revival it to the top and try again the next turn. So it almost acts as like another. It's somewhere in between like a protection spell and something like Mizzix's Mastery, where it's like another piece of another like payoff in itself. But of course, you need something else to work with it. So, it is like kind of limited, and there's like situations where like, oh look, I will interact with the deck that needs this in its graveyard or on top of the deck. But like in general, that doesn't come up very often.
It has a suite of cute corner cases where it does stuff, and being like very cheap means that you can like use it and almost all the time. But I think like, I don't know, there's a lot of slower decks that just like jam in Noxious Revival when they can honestly be playing something like I know this is gonna sound weird, but like
Dryad.
Eternal Witness, and Eternal Witness has like all the different creature synergies that you can layer with it and be like, okay, well now I have like this thing, and this is like can like finish my whatever combo with a meal, or will allow me to like loop certain things.
And it's way more tutorable if you're playing green.
100%.
Yeah. But like, I don't know. Also, yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's weird. It's kind of a mainstay that's been in things for a long time because it's had like, I don't know. It has a suite of various like useful, like small useful things, but like, if we, cEDH is like a mix between legacy and vintage, and like there's no legacy and vintage deck that run Noxious Revival, and it's like, and don't run Regrowth either. Obviously we have a limit to the number of win cons we can play, and if your like main thing gets countered, you can't just be like, okay, I need the second copy of it in my deck to draw now. But
I guess in some ways it is almost like a Praetor's Grasp situation for some decks, in which it's kind of like a fallback of oh crap, well I have like two combos in my deck, and one of the pieces is in the graveyard or something like that. Okay, well I'll Praetor's Grasp someone else's like Underworld Breach or something like that. And I mean, Noxious Revival can just you can use a situation where it's like, okay, Breach got countered, back on top, let's try it again.
So, speaking of Alex, you have mentioned an excellent one, because the next card on my list was Praetor's Grasp.
I was hoping you were going to say that, because I feel Praetor's Grasp is definitely overrated.
So,
yes,
I look at this card and I'm like, okay, nobody plays Grim Tutor in their deck because Grim Tutor is bad. This is Grim Tutor. Why does anyone play this card?
Yeah, it's very weird.
Now I get it. It's like, oh, you can take your opponent's combo piece. What? To which I will respond, what deck completely folds if you take one card out of it?
It's not more of folding. So I think the way you're thinking of this card is more of a disruptive card. It's actually a combo piece for 99% of the time that I've seen it. Or it takes something that will protect your combo, or it's a very useful
but
card.
at that point it's like Grim Tutor. It's weird. I think the format has like a number of people in it that play against like they just see like the same stuff all the time, and they're playing against like all of their buddies who are playing against who are playing like very similar stuff, and you're like, okay, well, he's always going to have this thing, I'm going to take it from him, and like grab a win con for me while simultaneously like getting something for myself. And like, okay, if like people are wheeling and stuff and I get to like keep this card that I Praetor's Grasp, and if my combo pieces are going to wind up like being thrown into the graveyard by random shit, it's like, hey, that's nice. Or if you're a deck that wants to be aggressive with your Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pact, it's like adds a slight benefit there. But like, if you're not having that kind of stuff happen and not having your win con stripped from you, and you're not, and like you're playing in a like pretty open meta, there's a lot of the time where it doesn't even like necessarily get you like a Thassa's Oracle back, like after you've maybe exiled your own or for something, and it's really like it's really freaking medium. It is a really medium cuttable card.
I'll comment on it. In my personal experience, playing it in fast combo decks, I think the biggest use case for me actually has been an out to a really aggressive, like an additional out for a really aggressive like consultation, because I've I think I'm kind of infamous for doing this sometimes, but I think like it's perfectly fine to go turn 1 consultation, name Mana Crypt, and try play the game out from there. I think you're picking up a lot more win percentage points than you're losing by doing a play like that. But I've been having that come up less frequently recently, and Praetor's Grasp is it is the slowest tutor that I'm playing, right? And it doesn't always get what I want. I'm like very low on it right now, and I'm actively considering swapping it for a different card. I think Noxious Revival is better than Praetor's Grasp, for like the reasons I was saying. For Noxious Revival, we were just talking about that. I'm hoping somebody will talk me out of swapping Praetor's Grasp for Vexing Shusher.
Vexing Shusher's sick.
It's super medium.
All right.
If you're playing, yeah.
So I had 2 more to go over. First is the Dramatic Scepter combo. So to quickly just, for anyone who doesn't remember what this is Isochron Scepter and Dramatic Reversal. So you can imprint Dramatic Reversal under it, and then as long as you have 3 mana worth of Mana Rocks or Dorks, you can generate infinite mana with it. And my issue with it is that 1, you have to play 2 different cards that are complete trash without the other, and 2, you then need a board state that includes 3 Mana Rocks or Dorks and an outlet for all of it.
Yeah, I haven't seen much of that lately, but if you see a bunch of like, I don't know, Dramatic Reversal Isochron Scepter, it's then yeah, I can definitely agree and say that it's overrated. I think where that combo belongs are in decks that like can not only like take advantage of that, like obviously win through their commander by having it, but decks that like, I'm just gonna like say specifically like a turbo decks that maybe also don't have red, because Dramatic Reversal like provides its own. It can be like a ritual by untapping your stuff. So Scepter is pretty much always just like extremely medium. But whatchamacallit, Dramatic Reversal can like untap your rocks and stuff. So it's like, I don't know, I feel like it's a card that is like good in 2 decks specifically, and like I mean I think it's better in more than 2 decks.
I think the only deck that I would ever want it in is Urza.
I gotta be honest though, John, when you're mentioning turbo decks that don't play red, I'm struggling to think of any that really fit the bill for this, right? Because I'm mostly thinking of, Esper, and that's something like Malcolm Timna usually. I just don't think that this combo is very
playable. Want me to tell you what I'm thinking of?
Sure.
There's some Tasigur turbo decks that are popping up that are pretty cool that utilize the sacrifice synergy with Tasigur, and the Turbo Thrasios Tymna decks.
Okay.
I think you want to be playing those cards in both of those decks.
Gotcha. Yeah, my initial thought was you probably want this combo specifically actually for Thrasios, Tymna, and Tassiger. Those have been the historic homes.
But
Urza works with it too.
But I'm also going to say again, specifically the turbo versions, because every other version of those decks should probably be running Collector Oof effects, and you do not like want to mix those two because they're just bad.
Oh.
You know, you don't want to do that.
Yeah, I mean,
those are like out of the like other than Urza shells.
I guess we're getting into like
suspicious.
We're getting into some of the reasons why this combo is not that great that we haven't already mentioned, and that's it folds to all of the same hate that people play for turbo decks, right? If you're playing something that's mid-rangey and you're a deck that's like, okay, I'm like perfectly happy playing Isochron Scepter and putting like a Swan Song or like a Mana Drain underneath it, or like an Abrupt Decay. Okay, here's the issue. You can't win cleanly under Rule of Law or like Null Rod effects. And that's what you're going to be, you're going to be trying to buddy up with the Stax player at the table and say, oh, you play stuff that handles with them, I'll deal on the stack, but you can't actually win underneath it. So then you're going to have to eventually fight them over it. I think that's just like a huge downside personally.
Yeah, it's really like not great. And then if you're like, and then it, not to mention, it still gets like interacted with. Like if anybody has a miscast or like a Flusterstorm, they can at least buy a turn, and then if anybody bounces that, you can't replay it. You've already exiled the thing, you know?
Yeah.
Like if anybody has a bounce spell, which are just in such plethora right now, it's gonna get rid of it, and you're just gonna sit there and be like, I spent 2 cards to do nothing here, and they were bad for 4 turns earlier, sitting in my hand doing nothing.
For what it's worth, though, I think we've gotten better at evaluating this combo. I know in the past, like people used to play like Dramatic Reversal and Isochron Scepter and decks like Cast, which I just thought I was wrong. I think like we've as a community we've kind of like come to the conclusion that like you probably don't want this combo unless like your commander allows you to win on the spot with it in play. And we're just talking about like other downsides surrounding it, so it is just like I feel like it's more niche than it used to be.
All right, so the last one I have, and this is broad, is stacks cards in non-Stax decks. So what I'm talking about is when you have things like you have some generic mid-range deck like, I don't know, Tymnacrom or whatever, or Kenrith. And then the deck is just randomly playing Opposition Agent or Dothy Voidwalker and has no other stacks pieces in the deck.
Yeah. I agree. I 100% agree. You need to have like the reason to be playing, like if you're going to be doing that, you need to like have a way to take advantage of it, maybe being like a creature, or it needs to be something like it really needs to be like hosing your opponents really hard. And the case is that a lot of the cards, like I don't know, like Douthie, I think Douthie is like the prime example, I feel like, of a card that I feel like people will just kind of put in their black whatever deck, and kind of just hope it sits there and gets something and does something eventually. And it's like a stacks piece. And same with like Oppo. Oppo is like, if you're playing a proactive deck and you want to do your own thing, everybody like realize the Opposition Agent as a card. And most good players, and even like a lot of like medium players, are going to be like playing around it and thinking about it. And then once it like hits the battlefield, you're not like getting value off of it unless you have, I don't know, unless you have like some alternative way to just like make use of it being a creature, and like, okay, well, I have my Tymna here, so I gotta like draw cards or whatever. But like often enough, like that's not even a good enough reason to play it, because you're not like disrupting your opponents as much as you might think. With
Can I push back on you a little bit here, Mister? I played Draneth in the Blue Farm.
Yeah.
I think there is a real use case for some of these cards. I just don't think like people are not going about it if they see like, wow, Opposition Agent is a high quality card. I should put this in my Rogue Timna deck because that's like a surefire way to get into a bad situation.
So I'll say that I will say that it obviously depends on the deck and the card, and I think Draneth Magistrate is actually a good exception to that, where it hoses other decks so hard that it's worth playing even in non-Stax decks.
Yeah,
it's like it's close to like Gilded Drake tier.
Yeah,
I think it's actually almost above it. But it doesn't accelerate your own. It doesn't like accelerate you, but like with the amount of commander-centric decks there are, you can just like the virtual card advantage you get by denying people all their commanders and then denying like the win con of Underworld Breach, which is like I hope I'm not in the minority here in saying that like it's the most powerful win con in cEDH right now, right? I think it's like that is the case.
No, I agree with you, but I guess to like fully flesh out the point I was going for, there, especially like lower color decks, there are reasons to play this because they overlap with other cards, and if you can leverage them into positions that will actually win you the game, then I think they can be worth including. So like I don't think Dauthi Voidwalker is like something that you should throw into every black deck, but if you're in a deck that has fewer colors and you're like clutching at straws for a higher density of payoff cards, then Dauthi Voidwalker can help you a little bit because it can, you'll be able to get wheels or tutors or things like that from other players. I think Opposition Agent, where it might really be good in a deck that wants to play a faster game and isn't just happy sitting on a hate bear, is if you're doing something where you're playing like the Balerion combo with Balerion of the Mornsong and Opposition Agent to try close out the game that way, like you're getting a bunch of tutors, or with Scheming Symmetry, right? That's the main use case I can see for it.
For me, the way that I see it is these cards really shine when you're playing with newer players. Like the more experience, I'm serious. No, like people will feed your Dauthi like no tomorrow, and like it's the same reason like Fish and Ristic Study, like Mystic Remora and Ristic Study are just absolutely broken when you're playing against people who just don't care and just think that like,
how about Crom?
I'm just gonna repeat it. Oh, Crom! I mean, Crom is a 4/4 flyer with haste.
You compare Crom playing with people who don't respect it, right? I mean, you're gonna draw a bunch of cards compared to people who like are really on top of their game. You're like happy to draw 3 cards over 5 games.
Literally, like actually,
that's Crom overperforming.
No, actually, it really is. People are that. So yeah, I would say the cards are, once you get to a decent level and the more experience at the pod, which will end up happening toward the end of like tournaments, when you get to like the top 8, top 4, it's you're those little stacks pieces. You'd rather them be something else personally versus just sitting there.
You don't want to play cards that aren't like working towards your game plan. If you're not a Stax deck, even though it is one-sided, you're playing a game plan that isn't your own a lot of the time.
That's a good way to put it. Like that that's like, again, something similar with like Mnemonic Betrayal, right? Like it's not your game plan.
Right.
All right. Well, that was everything I had on my list. Did you guys have any other cards you wanted to talk about?
I thought of one extra one just to quickly slide it at the end.
The bonus card at the end.
Snapback.
The bounce a creature, exile a blue card to cast this for free.
Yeah, believe it or not, there are like some people who are still like pretty happy playing this card.
Wow.
I think this card is like, God, I don't think it's worth playing if you're planning on like hard casting it most of the time. I think the use case for pitching a blue card for it is just terrible in most decks. You really need to be playing like exactly blue farm or like Tavesh Crom to have enough cards that you're
Not even
happy pitching something.
card
But
pool
even
is so
then,
good in like blue farm. I feel like you don't even want it there.
You
Like
don't
Yeah.
want it.
there's just better stuff to do.
Yeah. When John, did you have a card you wanted to add in?
no, not really.
Any
No, you
last
didn't-
calls, Jesse?
You didn't want to say counterbalance?
No, I actually don't think it is.
No.
I think you overrate it. But I don't actually think it is overrated.
Yeah, two things to take away from this video. Counterbalance is amazing. Played in every blue deck, and always give the Winota player your Forbidden Orchard
Yes, always.
spirits.
One other thing I think as well, like you need to evaluate your stuff based on like what you're seeing. We don't
100%.
have like exact numbers on everything and what's going to pop up. We don't have an MTG goldfish for CDH. Look at what people around you are playing, because that's just the reality of the format, and acknowledge that like, okay, certain things work against what I'm seeing and certain things don't. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me tonight, guys. I know this was all last minute and it's pretty late, so we're probably all tired, but I had a lot of fun.
No, you're good. No,
Yeah,
this
it
was
was
cool.
fun.
I like talking about it.
Good, yeah.
All right, and I know you're going to be busy for a while, Jesse, but hopefully we can do this again sometime soon.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
All right. See you guys.